The dawn of Greek civilization, circa 3000 BC to 800 BC, before there were cities, before there were empires, there was the sea. And on the shores of the Aegean thousands of years ago, a great story began. This is the land that would give the world philosophy, democracy, theater, and myth. This is Greece. Long before the famous warriors of Sparta or the thinkers of Athens, early people lived on these rocky coasts and islands. They built small farming villages, raised goats and olives, and sailed between islands under the bright Mediterranean sun. Over time, these small communities grew into something extraordinary, the first great civilizations of Europe. Around 3000 BC, on the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization rose to power. They were sailors, traders, and artists, people of the sea. Their cities were filled with color and art, their walls painted with dolphins, dancers, and sacred bulls. At the heart of their world stood Narcissus, a grand palace filled with twisting corridors and secret rooms, a place that might have inspired the legend of the labyrinth and the Minotaur. The Minoans traded with Egypt and Mesopotamia, spreading their influence across the sea. But around 1450 BC, disaster struck. A great volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini shook the world. Tsunamis and earthquakes followed, and the Minoan civilization began to fade into memory. From the Greek mainland rose another people, the Mycenaeans. They were warriors and builders, known for their stone fortresses and golden masks. At Mycenae, their kings ruled behind massive walls, and their stories later became the legends of heroes Agamemnon, Achilles, and Odysseus. The Mycenaeans traded widely but also fought fiercely. Around 1200 BC, their power too began to crumble, perhaps from wars, invasions, or famine. As their cities burned, Greece fell into what historians call the Dark Age, a time when writing disappeared and trade nearly stopped. For centuries, the once great palaces lay silent. But the Greek spirit did not die. It slept waiting for its rebirth. By around 800 BC, something remarkable began to happen. Small communities called polis, or city-states, began to form across the land. Each had its own government, traditions, and gods. Some were ruled by kings, others by councils. And in these humble beginnings lay the seeds of what would become the heart of Western civilization. In Athens, thinkers began to question the world. In Sparta, warriors prepared to defend their honor. On Mount Olympus, the gods of Greece, Zeus, Hera, Athena, and Poseidon became symbols of the people's imagination and faith. From myth and struggle, from sea and stone, the Greek identity was born. The land of philosophers, poets, and warriors was ready to step into history and to change the world forever. The story of Greece begins not with conquest, but with curiosity, a desire to explore, to create, to understand. And from these ancient beginnings, the world's first ideas of freedom and knowledge would one day rise. This is where civilization began and where humanity first learned to ask the question, why? Classical Greece, the age of Athens and Sparta, 800 BC to 323 BC. From the ashes of the Dark Age, Greece was reborn. Across the land, new city-states began to rise, small, proud, and fiercely independent. Each had its own customs, its own gods, and its own dreams. But two cities would come to define this age more than any others, Athens and Sparta. Together, they shaped what we now call classical Greece, a time when art, philosophy, and war built the foundation of Western civilization. Athens stood by the sea, its people open and curious, trading with distant lands and welcoming new ideas. It was here that a new idea was born, democracy. For the first time in human history, citizens gathered to make decisions together, to vote, to speak, to argue, and to shape their own future. Not everyone could vote. Women, slaves, and foreigners were left out. But even so, the concept was revolutionary. The people ruled themselves, not a king. While Athens was a city of thinkers, Sparta was a city of warriors. Nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, the Spartans lived a life of discipline and strength. From childhood, boys were trained to be soldiers, fearless, loyal, and hard as steel. Their entire society was built for war. They had no great artists or philosophers, but they were unmatched on the battlefield. In Sparta, freedom came through obedience, and honor came only through victory. By the 5th century BC, Greece had become a collection of vibrant, competing city-states, sometimes trading, sometimes fighting. But in 490 BC, a storm came from the east. The mighty Persian Empire, ruled by King Darius, set out to conquer Greece. Their armies were vast, hundreds of thousands strong, while the Greek city-states were small and divided. Yet, when the Persians landed near a place called Marathon, the Athenians stood firm. Outnumbered, they charged into battle and won a stunning victory. A messenger ran over 26 miles to bring the news back to Athens, and from that run came the word we still use today, the Marathon. The Persians returned 10 years later, now led by King Xerxes, seeking revenge. Cities across Greece prepared to resist. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, 300 Spartans under King Leonidas made their famous stand. They fought until the last man, buying precious time for the rest of Greece to unite. When Athens was later burned to the ground, its people did not surrender. Instead, they took to the sea. Under the leadership of Themistocles, the Athenian navy crushed the Persian fleet at Salamis, turning the tide of war. By 479 BC, the Persians were finally driven out of Greece. After the war, Athens rose to greatness. It became the cultural and political heart of Greece, a city of marble temples, theaters, and philosophers. Under the leadership of Pericles, the Parthenon was built, shining white against the blue Attic sky. Artists sculpted gods in stone. Playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides filled the theaters with stories of tragedy and heroism. And thinkers like Socrates began to ask the deepest questions of life. What is justice? What is truth? What does it mean to live a good life? But Athens' growing power made other city-states uneasy, especially Sparta. Old friendships turned to fear, and fear turned to war. From 431 BC to 404 BC, the Peloponnesian War tore Greece apart. For nearly 30 years, Greeks fought Greeks. Athens, the city of light, was eventually defeated by Sparta, and the Golden Age faded. Philosophy survived, but the unity of Greece was gone. In the years that followed, new thinkers like Plato and Aristotle kept the spirit of knowledge alive, even as the old city-states weakened. And in the north, a new power began to rise. Macedonia, led by King Philip II and his son, Alexander. By 336 BC, Alexander would unite the Greek world and lead it beyond its borders, creating an empire that stretched all the way to India. With his rise, the age of the city-states came to an end, and the Hellenistic era began. An age when Greek ideas would spread across continents and shape the future of the entire world. The story of classical Greece is a story of balance between freedom and order, art and war, reason and passion. It was an age that gave humanity its first glimpse of what it could become, a civilization that valued thought as much as strength. And even though its glory would one day fade, the light of Greece would never truly go out. It would live on in every idea of democracy, every act of courage, and every dream of freedom that followed. The Hellenistic Age, Alexander the Great, and the spread of Greek culture 323 BC, 231 BC, when the sun set on the age of Athens and Sparta. A new dawn rose in the north, in a land called Macedonia. It was a kingdom the proud city-states once looked down upon, calling its people half Greek and uncivilized. But from this land would come a young man whose name would echo through all of history, Alexander the Great. Born in 356 BC in the city of Pella, Alexander was the son of King Philip II, a brilliant ruler and soldier. Philip had already united most of Greece through war and diplomacy. But Alexander's mother, Olympias, told her son he was destined for something even greater. As a boy, Alexander studied under Aristotle, the great philosopher. He learned about science, logic, art, and the stories of heroes like Achilles. These lessons shaped his mind, but war would shape his destiny. When his father was assassinated in 336 BC, Alexander, just 20 years old, became king. Many expected Greece to rebel against the young ruler. Instead, Alexander acted swiftly and decisively. He marched south, forcing the Greek city-states to submit, then turned his gaze east, toward the mightiest empire the world had ever known, Persia. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, with 40,000 soldiers. He threw a spear into Persian soil and declared it land conquered by Greece. From that moment, his journey became legend. At the Battle of Granicus, his first major fight, he led from the front, charging directly into enemy lines. Then came the Battle of Issus in 333 BC, where he faced the Persian king, Darius III, though outnumbered. Alexander's tactics and courage broke the Persian army, sending Darius fleeing into the desert. The world began to whisper his name with awe. As Alexander's armies marched farther, city after city fell before him. He entered Egypt, not as a conqueror, but as a liberator, freeing it from Persian rule. There, he founded a new city, Alexandria, which would later become one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. In 331 BC, Alexander met Darius, again, at Gilgamesh. This time, the Persians brought an army said to be over 200,000 strong. Yet once again, Alexander's strategy triumphed. Darius was defeated, and the Persian Empire, once the greatest on earth, was no more. At just 25 years old, Alexander ruled an empire stretching from Greece to India. But victory was never enough for him. He pushed onward through deserts, mountains, and storms, chasing the edge of the known world. In India, he faced the mighty war elephants of King Porus. It was one of his hardest battles, but Alexander won, impressed even his enemies, and made Porus an ally. Years of marching and fighting had taken their toll. Alexander's men were weary, far from home, and longed to return to Greece. Finally, at the banks of the Hyphasis River, his army refused to go farther. The great conqueror turned back. In Babylon, in 323 BC, Alexander suddenly fell ill. Some said it was fever, others whispered of poison. At just 32 years old, the greatest military genius in history was dead. With no heir strong enough to rule, his vast empire quickly shattered, divided among his generals, known as the Diadochi. But even in death, Alexander's influence did not fade. From Egypt to India, cities bearing his name spread Greek culture, language, and art across continents. This new world became known as the Hellenistic era, a blend of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions. In Alexandria, scholars studied the stars and the human body. The Library of Alexandria became the heart of ancient knowledge. Artists sculpted in Greek style, but with new influences from the East. Greek became the common language of trade and science. Though Greece itself was no longer united, its ideas ruled the ancient world. The dream of Alexander, of one world connected by knowledge and courage, had become reality. The Hellenistic age was more than the story of conquest. It was the story of how Greek culture transcended borders, empires, and time itself. From the marble temples of Athens to the deserts of Egypt, the spirit of Greece lived on, not through kings or armies, but through ideas. And those ideas of logic, democracy, and discovery would one day shape the modern world itself. Greece under Rome, from conquered nation to cultural teacher, 31 BC to 476 AD. When the last echoes of Alexander's empire faded, Greece stood divided, a land of proud cities but weak kings. The power once spread across the world had turned inward, and in the West, a new force was rising. Rome. Rome had admired Greece for centuries. Its generals read Greek philosophy, its artists copied Greek statues, and its children learned Greek myths. But admiration soon turned into ambition. To the Romans, Greece was not just a teacher, it was a prize. In 146 BC, after years of wars and revolts, Greece fell under Roman rule. The great city of Corinth was destroyed, its treasures taken to Rome. The once free Greek world was now part of the Roman Empire. But this was not a story of total defeat. Instead, something remarkable happened. Greece began to conquer Rome, not with armies, but with ideas. Roman generals marched under the eagle banner, but their minds were filled with Greek thought. They studied the works of Plato and Aristotle. Greek tutors taught the sons of Roman senators. The great temples of Rome, built in marble and perfection, echoed the beauty of Athens and Olympia. The poet Horace once said, "Greece, though conquered, took her conqueror captive," and he was right. For the Greek people, life under Rome brought peace and stability after centuries of war. Cities like Athens, Corinth, and Thessalonica became centers of trade and culture once more. Greek artisans filled Roman villas with mosaics and sculptures. Theaters echoed again with drama and laughter. Philosophers debated in marketplaces, and orators taught the art of persuasion to Roman visitors. The Roman emperors themselves held Greece in deep respect. Emperor Hadrian, who ruled in the 2nd century AD, loved Greek art and philosophy so much that he filled Athens with new temples and monuments. He even built a grand library, a gift to the city that had once shaped the world's mind. Greek athletes continued to compete in the Olympic Games, kept alive under Roman protection. Though Greece was no longer free, it was not forgotten. It had become the cultural heart of the empire. But as centuries passed, a new voice began to rise, one that would change both Greece and Rome forever. In the 1st century AD, Christianity spread across the eastern Mediterranean. Among the first places to hear this message was Greece itself. In the city of Corinth, the Apostle Paul preached about love, mercy, and the one God. His letters to the Corinthians would one day become part of the New Testament. At first, many Greeks resisted this strange new faith, but over time, the message took root. Old temples slowly closed, and crosses began to rise where statues of Zeus once stood. The land that had once believed in many gods now began to believe in one. As the centuries turned, the Roman Empire grew too vast, too heavy to rule as one. In 285 AD, it was divided into East and West. Rome ruled the West. Constantinople, a new city founded by Emperor Constantine, ruled the East. And where did Constantinople stand? In the ancient land of Greece's influence on the edge of Europe and Asia. Constantine embraced Christianity, making it the empire's official religion. He named his capital after himself, Constantinople, but its heart was Greek. The language of government, culture, and faith in the East became Greek once again. The Empire of the East, later called the Byzantine Empire, was, in truth, the continuation of Greece itself. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire collapsed under barbarian invasions. Rome fell, its legions scattered. But in the East, the Greek-speaking empire endured, strong, wealthy, and cultured. Art, science, and philosophy continued to flourish in Constantinople, Thessalonica, and Athens. The world might have changed, but Greece, though hidden beneath new names and rulers, was still alive. The marble temples were cracked, and the philosophers were long gone. Yet the spirit of Greece, the love of knowledge, beauty, and reason burned brighter than ever. It had survived conquest, empire, and time itself. And through the Romans, and later the Byzantines, Greece had found a new immortality. The story of Greece under Rome is not one of defeat, but of transformation. It was the age when Greece, though conquered, became eternal, when its culture shaped not just one empire, but all of Western civilization. Because in truth, the empire may have been Roman, but the soul of that empire was forever Greek. The Byzantine Empire, Greece reborn in the East for 76 to 1204 AD, when the Western Roman Empire fell. The world thought Rome's glory had ended. Barbarian tribes stormed its cities, and the eternal city itself lay in ruins. But far to the east, another Rome stood tall, shining with marble domes and golden crosses. This was Constantinople, the new Rome, the heart of what the world would come to call the Byzantine Empire. And though it bore the name of Rome, its soul, its language, and its spirit were entirely Greek. The Eastern Roman Empire began as an administrative division, but over time it became something new, a continuation of Greece itself. By the late 5th century, Greek was the language of the court, the church, and the people. Greek philosophy shaped its learning, Greek art filled its churches, and Greek faith guided its rulers. At the center of this empire stood Constantinople, built by Emperor Constantine the Great. It was a city of breathtaking beauty, guarded by mighty walls, filled with palaces, markets, and libraries. It was also the crossroads of the world, where traders from Asia, Africa, and Europe met. Gold from Egypt, silk from China, spices from India, all passed through its great harbor, the Golden Horn. To its people, Constantinople was not just a city, it was the center of the universe. In the 6th century, the empire reached new heights under Emperor Justinian I. He dreamed of restoring the old Roman glory, and for a time, he did. His armies conquered parts of Italy, North Africa, and Spain. But his greatest legacy was not war, it was creation. He built the magnificent Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. Its massive dome seemed to float in the air, glowing with mosaics of gold and light. Even today, it stands as one of the most awe-inspiring monuments ever made. Justinian also reformed the laws of the empire, creating the Corpus Juris Civilis, or body of civil law, which would shape European legal systems for centuries. Under Justinian, the Byzantine Empire became the shining beacon of civilization in a dark and chaotic world. But glory never lasts forever. After Justinian's death, new enemies rose: Persians, Avars, and later, the growing power of Islam. Arab armies swept across the Middle East and North Africa, taking lands that had once been Byzantine. Constantinople itself was besieged more than once, yet it stood firm, protected by its massive Theodosian walls. and the mysterious weapon known as Greek fire, a burning liquid that could ignite even on water. Inside the city, scholars preserved the knowledge of ancient Greece, works of Plato, Aristotle, and Hippocrates, while much of Europe had forgotten them. Monks copied these texts by hand, keeping alive the wisdom that would one day spark the Renaissance. Despite wars and losses, the Byzantine Empire remained rich in art, faith, and learning. Its churches glittered with mosaics, its icons shone with divine beauty. Byzantine artists saw their work as a form of prayer. Each image of Christ or the Virgin Mary was not just painted, but worshipped. The empire's faith defined its people. Christianity had evolved here into Eastern Orthodox Christianity, distinct from the Roman Church in the West. It valued tradition, mysticism, and the idea that beauty itself was a path to God. From this belief came music, architecture, and ritual unlike anything in the world. Greek-speaking priests and monks spread this faith to distant lands, to the Slavs, the Russians, and the Balkans, carrying with them the Greek alphabet and culture. Even as the empire shrank, its influence grew. By the 11th century, internal struggles weakened Byzantium. Emperors fought among themselves, and new threats emerged: the Seljuk Turks in the east, and the Crusaders from the west. In 1054, a great religious split, the Great Schism, divided Christianity into Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic. The unity that had once bound Christendom was broken. And then, in 1204, disaster struck. During the Fourth Crusade, Western knights, who were meant to fight in the Holy Land instead, turned their swords on Constantinople itself. They sacked the city, burned its churches, and stole its treasures. For 3 days, the capital of the Greek world was drowned in fire and blood. It was one of the darkest moments in Greek history. Though the Byzantine Empire would rise again, it was never the same. Its golden age had passed, but its light would never truly go out. For centuries, the Byzantines had kept alive the flame of Greek culture, language, and faith. When the rest of Europe fell into darkness, Greece, reborn as Byzantium, had been the world's last great beacon of civilization. The empire may have been Roman in name, but in heart and soul, it was, and always would be, Greek. The fall of Constantinople and Ottoman rule 1204 to 1821. The fall of Constantinople in 1204 had shaken the world, once the richest and most beautiful city on earth. The heart of Greek civilization now lay in ruins, its churches looted, its people scattered. The dream of the Byzantine Empire seemed lost, but the Greek spirit, forged over thousands of years, refused to die. After the Crusaders' attack, the once great Byzantine Empire was divided. Latin rulers from the west took control of Constantinople, while smaller Greek kingdoms rose in exile, in Nicaea, Epirus, and Trebizond. For nearly 60 years, they fought to keep the idea of Byzantium alive. Then, in 1261, a Greek general named Michael VIII, Palaiologos, recaptured Constantinople. The city was free again, and the empire reborn. But it was only a shadow of its past, poor, weakened, and surrounded by powerful enemies. Still, the Greek people held fast to their faith and culture, believing that God would one day restore their glory. While Byzantium struggled to survive, a new empire was rising from the east, the Ottoman Turks. They were fierce warriors, led by ambitious sultans who dreamed of conquering the world. One by one, they took the lands that had once been Greek, Asia Minor, the Balkans, and finally, they set their eyes on the prize, Constantinople. In 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years old, brought his massive army to the city's gates. He commanded over 80,000 soldiers and powerful cannons, unlike anything the world had seen before. Inside the walls, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos stood with barely 7,000 defenders, Greeks, Italians, and a handful of allies. For weeks, the city endured bombardment and siege. Then, on May 29, 1453, the final assault came. As the sun rose, the Ottomans stormed the walls. The emperor fought bravely in the streets until he was surrounded. His last words were said to be, "The city has fallen, but I live as a king no more." By nightfall, Constantinople, the new Rome, the queen of cities, had fallen. The Byzantine Empire was gone. For the Greek world, it was the end of an era and the beginning of centuries of foreign rule. For nearly 400 years, Greece lived under the Ottoman Empire. The Greeks were forbidden from holding power or practicing their faith freely, yet their identity survived. In small villages and secret schools, Priests taught children to read and write in Greek. They whispered the stories of Homer and Alexander, and taught them to sing hymns in the old tongue. The Greek Orthodox Church became the guardian of the nation's soul. In the absence of kings and armies, it preserved their history, language, and hope. Every Easter, as bells rang through mountain churches, people prayed not only for salvation, but for freedom. Despite oppression, Greek culture continued to thrive in hidden ways. Merchants traded across the Mediterranean, scholars studied in secret, and poets wrote of liberty. A spark was growing, slow but unstoppable. By the late 18th century, winds of change swept through Europe. Revolutions in France and America inspired the Greeks to dream of independence once more. Educated Greeks living abroad began spreading ideas of freedom and equality. Secret societies like the Philosophers, the Friendly Brotherhood, were formed, planning rebellion in silence. In 1821, the spark finally caught fire. Across the Peloponnese, in the mountains of Rumeli and the islands of the Aegean, the Greeks rose in arms. They fought not for empire, but for the simple right to be free. Famous heroes like Theodoros Kolokotronis, Laskarina Bouboulina, and Georgios Karaskokis became legends. The war was brutal. Cities were burned. Thousands died, but the Greeks refused to surrender. After years of struggle and foreign intervention, their courage was finally rewarded. In 1830, the world recognized the birth of a new nation, modern Greece. After nearly 400 years in chains, the Greeks had reclaimed their freedom. The fall of Constantinople had once marked the end of Greek Empire, but from its ashes a nation was reborn, forged not by kings or conquerors, but by faith, endurance, and the unbreakable will of a people. The story of Greece under Ottoman rule is not one of defeat. It is the story of a long, patient struggle for identity and hope. And when freedom finally came, it was not the beginning of a new chapter, but the return of an ancient one, the spirit of Hellas, alive once more. The modern Greek state, rebirth and struggle, 1821 to 1945, freedom, had finally come to Greece in 1830. After nearly 4 centuries under Ottoman rule, the Greek flag was raised once again over the land of Homer, Leonidas, and Alexander. The ancient nation had returned, but rebuilding it would prove harder than winning it back. When Greece was recognized as an independent country, it was small, only the Peloponnese, central Greece, and a few islands. Athens, once the heart of the ancient world, was little more than a ruined village. But to the Greeks, it was sacred ground. They dreamed of reviving their homeland's ancient glory. To lead the new state, the European powers, Britain, France, and Russia placed a foreign prince on the throne, King Otto of Bavaria, only 17 years old. He arrived in 1833, bringing architects, advisors, and soldiers from Europe. They began building a capital worthy of history, new roads, neoclassical buildings, and the grand University of Athens. But King Otto struggled to understand his people. He ruled as an absolute monarch, ignored Greek customs, and relied too much on foreign ministers. The Greeks, who had fought so hard for freedom, wanted a say in their future. By 1843, soldiers and citizens gathered in front of the palace in protest. They demanded a constitution, and they got one. It was the first taste of democracy in modern Greece. Still, the early years were not easy. The economy was weak, the countryside was poor, and pirates and bandits roamed freely. Many Greeks longed to see all their brothers free, especially those still living under Ottoman rule. This dream became known as the Megali idea, the great idea, the vision of restoring Greece to its ancient borders, uniting all Greeks under one flag. As the 19th century moved on, Greece slowly began to grow. Through wars and diplomacy, they gained new lands, the Ionian Islands in 1864, Thessaly in 1881, and Crete after years of rebellion. In 1862, King Otto was overthrown, and a new monarch took his place, King George I, from Denmark's royal family. Under him, Greece entered a new era of progress and pride. Athens became a modern European capital. Railways connected the countryside, trade flourished, and the Olympic Games were revived there in 1896, bringing the spirit of ancient Greece back to life. But the dream of uniting all Greeks remained unfinished. Across the Aegean islands and cities like Smyrna, Constantinople, and Thessaloniki still belonged to the Ottomans. In 1912 and 1913, during the Balkan Wars, Greece fought alongside its neighbors to push the Ottoman Empire out of Europe. It was a stunning success. Greece doubled in size, gaining Macedonia, Epirus, and Crete. Thessaloniki, the great northern city, was finally free. For a moment, it seemed the ancient dream was coming true. But soon, dark clouds gathered again over Europe. In 1914, the First World War began, and Greece found itself divided. Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos, one of Greece's greatest leaders, wanted to join the Allies. But King Constantine I, married to the Kaiser's sister, wanted to stay neutral. The nation split in two, the king in Athens, Venizelos in Thessaloniki. It was called the National Schism, and it nearly tore Greece apart. Eventually, Venizelos and the Allies won. Greece joined the war and fought bravely, and when the Allies triumphed, Greece hoped to claim lands in Asia Minor, where many Greeks still lived. In 1919, Greek troops landed in Smyrna, and for a brief time, it looked like the empire would return. But fate had other plans. The Turkish nationalists, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, rose against the Greeks. After 3 years of bloody fighting, the Greek army was defeated. In 1922, Smyrna burned, and more than 1 million Greek refugees fled across the sea to their homeland. The Asia Minor catastrophe, as it came to be known, changed Greece forever. The dream of the great idea died in fire and sorrow. In the years that followed, Greece was a land of exhaustion and rebuilding. Refugees flooded the cities, economies struggled, and governments rose and fell. Kings were exiled, republics declared, coups attempted, but through it all, the Greek people endured. By the late 1930s, a new challenge appeared: World War II. In 1940, Italy, led by Mussolini, demanded that Greece surrender. The Greek Prime Minister, Ioannis Mettakis, refused with a single word: "Oki, no." The Greeks fought back fiercely, pushing the Italians into retreat. It was one of the first Allied victories of the war. But in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded from the north. Greece was conquered once again, but never broken. The resistance fought from the mountains, keeping alive the same spirit that had survived centuries of struggle. From revolution to monarchy, from victory to tragedy, the journey of modern Greece was one of endless resilience. Empires fell, kings came and went, and wars reshaped borders, yet the Greek spirit remained unshaken. They had rebuilt their nation from ashes before, and they would do it again. The modern history of Greece was not a straight road. It was a climb up a steep mountain. But at every turn, through every hardship, the Greeks carried one thing with them: hope. And that hope would guide them into a new era, ready to face the challenges of the modern world. Greece in the modern world, 1945 to 2025, when the guns of World War II fell silent. Greece stood battered, but unbowed. Its cities lay in ruins, its villages burned, and its people broken by years of occupation. But as the dust settled, the Greeks faced a painful truth: the war was over, yet the peace was still far away. In 1944, as German forces withdrew, rival Greek groups, those who had resisted together, turned on one another. One side, backed by the West, wanted a monarchy and Western-style democracy. The other, inspired by Soviet communism, dreamed of a new socialist Greece. And so began the Greek Civil War, 1946 to 1949, one of the first battles of the Cold War. The fighting was brutal. Villages were burned, families divided, and thousands fled their homes. After 3 long years, the Western-backed forces emerged victorious, but the price was immense. Greece was free again, but also deeply scarred and divided. The nation had survived foreign occupation, only to be torn apart by its own hands. In the 1950s, Greece tried to heal. Aid from the Marshall Plan helped rebuild cities, roads, and industries. Athens began to hum again with life. But many Greeks, struggling to find work, left for other lands: Australia, Canada, Germany, and America. They carried with them their language, food, and faith, planting pieces of Greece around the world. By the 1960s, Greece was modernizing fast. New highways connected the mainland, schools were rebuilt, and tourism began to rise. People from across the world came to see the Parthenon, the islands of the Aegean, and the golden beaches of Crete and Rhodes. But under the surface, political tensions simmered once again. In 1967, a group of army officers staged a coup d'état, seizing power and suspending democracy. It was the beginning of the Greek military junta, known as the regime of the colonels. For 7 long years, freedom of speech was crushed. protests were banned, and political opponents were jailed or exiled. But the spirit of the Greek people could not be silenced. In 1973, students at the Athens Polytechnic University rose in defiance, chanting for bread, education, and freedom. The military responded with tanks. The uprising was brutally crushed, yet their courage marked the beginning of the end for the dictatorship. In 1974, the junta collapsed after a disastrous attempt to overthrow the government of Cyprus, leading to Turkey's invasion of the island. Democracy was restored in Greece, and Konstantinos Karamanlis returned from exile to lead the nation into a new era of freedom. It was one of the most emotional moments in modern Greek history. After centuries of occupation, kings, and dictators, Greece had finally reclaimed true democracy. The next decades brought rapid change. In 1981, Greece joined the European Economic Community, later known as the European Union. For the first time, Greece stood shoulder to shoulder with the great nations of Europe as an equal partner. Tourism boomed, industries grew, and the standard of living rose. The once poor country of shepherds and fishermen became a modern European state. The blue flag with white stripes flew proudly over airports, ports, and ministries, a symbol of both history and progress. In 2001, Greece joined the Eurozone, adopting the euro as its currency. Athens became a bustling hub again, and in 2004, Greece hosted the Olympic Games, returning the ancient festival to its birthplace. The world watched in awe as fireworks lit up the Acropolis, a moment of national pride, a tribute to the country that gave the world democracy and the spirit of competition. But good times would not last forever. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit, and Greece was hit hardest of all. Years of debt, corruption, and mismanagement came crashing down. The economy collapsed, unemployment soared, and thousands lost their homes and jobs. Protests filled the streets of Athens. People shouting, crying, demanding change. The crisis tested the Greek soul like few events before it. Yet, even in the darkest times, the Greeks endured, as they always had. Through austerity, hardship, and sacrifice, the nation slowly began to recover. By the late 2010s, Greece's economy stabilized, tourism returned, and new generations began rebuilding their future. Today, in 2025, Greece stands as a nation reborn yet again. It has faced empires, dictators, wars, and financial ruin, and survived them all. The white houses of the islands shine brighter than ever, drawing millions from around the world. Ancient ruins stand beside modern cities, where technology and tradition walk hand in hand. The Greeks continue to wrestle with challenges: the economy, migration, climate change, but they do so with the same resilience that once defended Thermopylae and rebuilt from ashes in 1821. They are still the storytellers, philosophers, and dreamers of the Mediterranean, a people shaped by the past but never bound by it. As the sun sets over the blue Aegean Sea, the story of Greece continues, a story not just of ruins and glory, but of survival, faith, and the eternal pursuit of freedom.